Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how do you scale an inside team. We got Lori Harmon on, and she's built out the BlackBerry team, and not the BlackBerry, the phone, but BlackBerry, the security device. We missed the first couple of minutes of the introduction. There was some static on the line, so I'm going to go about a minute into the conversation. So I'll give you a little bit of context about Lori. Lori's done a fantastic job about building inside sales teams. She has an interesting opinion about artificial intelligence, how that applies, and is very open-minded about what works and what doesn't work today. Doesn't have this arcane belief that what worked 5 years ago is going to work today. Very adaptive, very sensitive to the marketplace, very realistic and empathetic to the market instead of just this cram it down everybody's throat that it seems to be ubiquitous in the sales and marketing space today, not caring about the customer. What we have to do is really care about the customer, because if they don't buy, we don't have a customer. So we're going to get into that. Before we do, I want to make sure you're checking out two things, and they're at the same place, discoverorg.com. They've got a new ebook out about how to scale up your sales team from that middle pack of B players into A players. What's the difference, and how do you move those? And it's based off of the science that's been produced by another partner, gong.io. So they've teamed up together. They got a great ebook on it. So it's under resources at discoverorg.com. And Gong has a new report out on closing, when to bring it up, or competition, I should say. When to start closing in a conversation, when to bring up competition in a conversation, when not to, and how does it correlate to the actual closure of a deal? How do senior people do it differently than other people? How do you do it in the beauty contest, the highly competitive established marketplace, versus the brand new greenfield marketplace where people don't know what you do or your product is just new to the market? Which is a very different sale. And I think people overlook that way too often. They think that everybody already understands that they have this problem. They may feel the pain, but they may not have addressed or labeled the pain. And I've kind of come up with this new term of like, we have to be the 23andMe of the marketplace. And what I mean by that is when you get your DNA tested, you can kind of see what you're genetically predisposed to. Now, these are things that you don't feel yet, Alzheimer's or diabetes or things, cancers that you may be genetically prone to. Doesn't mean you're getting them. It just means that that genetic lottery it may be in your favor, it may not be. So the good part about it is if you know about it, you can prevent it. Now, in sales, what we got to do is we've got to surface these things that of a lot of our products are prevention products. And sales is a prevention profession, that we have to be able to show people that, you know, if you don't change these things now, that you're going to run into these problems shortly. You know, it may not be 20 years from now, it may be, 20 days from now. And here we are right at the end of Q2, in the middle of the year. I also want to make sure you're aware of the free ebook at b2brevenue.com and my two training courses that I'm really helping people out as far as creative ways of getting meetings, starting conversations with people. And it works both on the marketing demand gen side as well as the sales development, business development side. And it can be applied to both. And it's just a much more natural, humanistic way of doing it based off of relationships and science. So let's get into the interview with Lori. I'll sum it up at the end, and I'll tell you how you can get a free copy of my book, The Maverick Selling Method. And when it is outbound, is it totally cold? I mean, BlackBerry certainly has a brand name. It may not be for software secure or security in general, but is it to existing customers? Is it complete greenfield? Can you
we're doing both. I mean, we certainly contact our existing customers because there are, we have a lot of great products that they may want to add to their portfolio. And we work with a lot of partners in our ISV channel. And those are also products that add value to them. So we definitely do cross-sell and upsell campaigns. And of course, every company wants to grow. So we do new logo campaigns. And it's not pure cold calling. we definitely have a really close partnership with our marketing organization, and we've set up what we call a demand center, and it's really a virtual organization. And so marketing and sales development are on a virtual team, even though they still have different reporting structures. So they're really closely aligned to where marketing is warming up some of those leads, but they're not really inbound yet. And then we follow up and make the phone calls and then send out more personalized emails. And so that's been our process. I think cold calling you're just not going to be successful with cold calling because it's very hard. And I don't really answer my phone if I don't know the phone number.
Now, I find that interesting that you said that having running an inside team. Most people, will not let it go. I think the phone itself is an insanely powerful tool.
I think the phone is great. I think it's really difficult to pick up the phone without anything else. Yes, BlackBerry has a great reputation, which we're really lucky. If you're a startup, you're not necessarily as fortunate. But if they've maybe seen your name and email and you call, it might help with the conversation. That said, with the new GDPR regulations that are coming out in Europe, I think it's going to make it much more difficult to go down that path and have them warmed up without an opt-in database. And so it's going to get much harder to operate in that way. Well, actually GDPR is already in place. Yeah. So it is already much harder in Europe, and it really depends then on how each individual company is going to apply that, in other regions. If they apply the same rules to the US, it's going to make it much harder for everybody basically they just have to cold call to get started.
Yeah.
Into a company.
Do you see that happening? Is that something that you anticipate?
Well, the way I understand the regulation is that for EMEA specifically, that if you don't have an opt-in database, like if the customer or contact hasn't opted in to having BlackBerry contact them, then really you shouldn't be contacting them. Now, there is some interpretation on what's called the legitimate business interest portion of the GDPR, where some companies I think are interpreted to say, hey, if I'm selling security and I'm trying to call a chief information security officer, then there should be a legitimate business reason that they're interested, so I should be able to call them without having them opted in.
Yeah. Or
I could call the gatekeeper and get through to them, and then they can accept my call and then accept further communications from me. So I think that is up to interpretation. But if you take it very on the pure side of, we can only call people and then do personal emails to them if they're on a specific opt-in list, is going to make it very difficult to do prospecting.
And let's get back to artificial intelligence. As far as determining what the people care about, their company, all of that kind of dossier type information. Mm-hmm. Do you use anything there?
Well, we don't specifically use anything there, at least not in inside sales. Now, I know that, marketing definitely has tools where they can observe when people come. I mean, they come in on on our website and they look at certain things, so they can definitely use different tools to observe that. But that's something that is an area that I want to get into. Is instead of just taking our history, let's take our history and match it to public information like LinkedIn searches or internet searches or other activity that's been done by that contact to make the outcome of that recommendation even more powerful and more accurate going forward. We're not quite there yet, but I do think that's definitely where things are going. There's technologies out there that do allow you to do that.
And now that you kind of expressed your thoughts on cold calling, so what is the kind of flow or cadence of your cold outbound reps?
Well, ideally, there's been several. Depends on the campaign. Like a few emails sent out by marketing to these contacts, and then we'll follow up with a phone call and then an email. And basically, we have a 21-day cadence, and it typically involves 7 phone calls and 4 to 5 emails. And we typically follow that for all of our different leads.
And have you varied it, or what do you, any patterns emerging?
Well, it does depend. I think the lead source really affects how many times you need to contact. And also if you're getting pop email addresses, you might need to do less contacts because they're typically not as high of a propensity to convert. And so we do see some patterns in that. We haven't done a lot of variation because it was done manually previously, which is a lot for a rep to manage. So now that we've automated it, we would be monitoring the automation and then obviously adjust based on things like lead source and results we've seen, but we're just not quite at that point yet.
And how about as far as social channels? Have you found traction there?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, I think social, well, I mean, we obviously use LinkedIn, and then we're using the Sales Navigator extension for that. And I think that's a very powerful tool for us. And even if, you can obviously send email. So if you're sending the right thing, it'll work. If you're not, then, hey, you sent me an email, worked. If you're not sending the right information, if you're just trying to go for the meeting on the first email, people are not likely to respond well. But if you're trying to build a relationship and provide value, then I think you can make progress. It might take longer than you want, but it's just the way it is, right? People aren't just going to go meet with every salesperson that contacts them, as we all know. And so you need to be providing value. So I think that's a channel, but just being able to find information about the people you want to contact. And maybe if you're not sending email, send them a personalized email or leave a voicemail that's personalized. You're going to get much farther with that process than you are talking about cold calling. Just, hey, this is Lori and I'm calling you because of this, and not really even putting any kind of a personal spin on it or connecting them with your solution and how it could benefit them. You're not going to get very far. So I think social is a very important part of the mix, but you have to have everything. You have to have the phone, you have to have email, you have to have social, you have to have all those components to make it work.
Yeah, because everybody's different on the other end.
Exactly.
Some people love the phone. Some people won't never pick it up. I'm like you.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when you say value, that is a kind of a really term that in sales has kind of been overused. How do you guys define it?
Well, I think for us, it is the business value that your solution provides. It's not the features, but it's on the benefit. And ideally, if you have it, the quantifiable benefit, like we've helped companies increase productivity by 50%, blah, blah, blah. Or, we've helped them save money, we have certain reduced time for emergency notifications. So those types of things, you've got to try to quantify where you can of benefits you've given to other preferably similar companies with the same solution. And so that to me is the business value that your product provides.
And how do you build up that skill with the reps? Is a particular hiring process and training process? Because those aren't innate skills.
They definitely aren't innate skills. And we do have an onboarding process that we go through and that we do specifically for inside sales. And then there's the new hire sales training that all the salespeople get. And really in all of that, anytime we are talking about a quote unquote product, we're not just talking about the product. We're always aligning that to the business value. And then, we have sales skills training for the more junior people who come in, which are typically the SDRs. And what we do with that is we do a lot of role play with them before they get on the phone. So they're comfortable. Somebody has to be comfortable sending out the message and discussing the message before they just get on the phone, because they'll be stumbling through it, right? So it's really important to have a lot of role play. And it's not just, okay, we do it now and then we never do it again. We do it on a regular weekly basis. We do different role plays with all the reps. And I think it's critical for them to get comfortable with the business value before they either leave a voicemail or try to talk to somebody about it.
And is that one-on-one, one-to-many? Is it round robin, circle, meeting room?
Well, typically we'll come up with a scenario. And so we'll just pair up and then we'll switch people. We'll pair, the manager will pair up with a rep and the rep's to rep. And then we'll rotate around, kind of like speed dating. They do that at some conferences. You do speed dating to meet other people at conferences, or speed dating to date. We rotate around. And the other thing is obviously listening into calls, coaching the rep. You can be in whisper mode where you can whisper to them while they're on the call, or you can interject yourself on the call, or you can just listen and coach them later. Recording calls, things like that are other good ways that we help the rep appreciate the business value of the product.
Now I heard SDR. So you segment the function from sales development, getting the meeting, to account exec, carrying the deal from the meeting to close. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. We have sales development reps whose purpose is to, qualify inbound marketing leads and do the outbound campaigns. When they find a qualified lead, that's passed to the appropriate account manager who then takes it forward through the sales cycle. So it is definitely a separate role.
And is that under inside sales or is that inside outside? Is it dependent or?
It's under inside sales.
It is. Okay.
Yes.
So that's a pretty complex sale to do without visiting. Is there demos or a technical sale component that is involved where you have sales engineers?
Not for the SDR portion, but yes, definitely during the sales cycle. We have inside engineers and we have external TSMs. So we do have TSMs that support all the different sales teams. And so we can do obviously demos over screen sharing types of technology like everybody else. So we can do that. We do that. And then there's, face-to-face meetings that the field engages in.
And, from a management standpoint, here we are at the end of Q2, and I typically, throughout my whole career, you see the meltdown the last month of the quarter. Where do your deals get stuck?
Where do they get stuck? That's a really good question. Well, I think they can get stuck in the, when the customer's doing a POC, it's possible. I mean, you always set an upfront contract and you outline the success criteria, but things can happen, right? Your buyer gets prioritized on some other project and then you want to extend, or maybe you do run into an issue with the product or their network, or, something happens and you just have to extend that. So I think that's probably the biggest area where things get delayed is during the proof of concept process, just because of the things I said.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of people listening who are trying to build what you've built. Given your vast experience and probably hard-earned lessons, what recommendations would you have for them?
In terms of building an inside sales team from?
Yeah, going from that, 2 or 3 people, doing whatever it takes to, getting to 10 and then, building out a management organization that would scale. Mm-hmm. And instead of you working 80 hours a week trying to hire people, train people, close deals. I'm sure you experienced that.
Exactly. Well, I said the number one thing is, figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Like, what is the role of the team? Are you starting with, for example, sales development reps? Then start with sales development and make that work. And then if you want to move on to an inside closing role, then again, define the box that they're going to sit in. Yeah. Whether that's by company revenue that they're selling to, or by employee size, or by some other metric that's important for your product. Make sure you put a box around it and focus, or maybe it's a vertical, whatever it is for your company, make sure it's focused, because you want to have a focus to get started and be successful. And you can always expand later. And just don't try to, eat an elephant in one bite, like take it in small pieces. And, you can't, if you're, a director or vice president, you can't do the whole thing yourself. You definitely need to bring on a manager who's experienced in inside sales to handle all the day-to-day, the hiring, the coaching and mentoring and role playing that I talked about. You can't do that, plus gotta kind of be the overall strategic leader. You really need to break that down and have a manager who can do that. And, break those two things apart. Don't try to have your SDR, then be the closing person, because typically it's different skills. And if they're, closing could be more fun. So if they have a lot to close, they're just going to close and they're never going to build pipeline. If there's nothing to close, they are stuck building pipeline, but then they don't, they're never going to get enough in their pipeline to potentially close it. So you really don't want to mix those two things together. You want to separate the roles, you want to focus, and you want to have the box that you're operating in with your success criteria, get it off the ground, and then you can add more over time.
Now, this SDR role has been kind of popularized, even though we've had inside sales for as long as I can remember. And we had separated more by whether you actually go to visit the customer or you don't, was the distinction. And sometimes they did full sales cycle on lower priced items, maintenance renewals, things like that. Mm-hmm. What profile have you found or cracked that code on the hiring side of the sales development rep?
Oh, in terms of the profile of the person you would hire?
Yeah, given that, do you hire people with zero experience?
So I would say that, I mean, some companies do that, and it really depends on your company and where they are in their life cycle. So a really large company, probably like an IBM, an Oracle, SAP, those types of companies,
Yeah.
they certainly have the infrastructure where you could bring in somebody from college, you could go through probably a fairly lengthy training process, and then you could come out and become an SDR. So I think if you have the infrastructure there, then you can do that. If you're a startup, so when I was at a startup, I definitely didn't hire anybody from college because we didn't have that. I needed to hire people where I could eliminate the variables. So I needed to have people who had already done the job, who had been successful in the job. So it wasn't a risk of, did I hire the wrong person? It was like, do we have the right message? Do we have the right product? Is anybody going to buy it, more than having the risk on, is it not the right sales development person? And so I hired very experienced salespeople or sales development reps at the startup. And if you're in between, I would say if you have a decent onboarding process, but maybe not the Uber process, you can probably hire people with a couple of years of some form of sales experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be high tech. It could be more consumer type of sales experience, or maybe financial services. And that would be fine as long as you can train them on your product and potentially different type of sales skills. Then you're okay. So it really depends on what your infrastructure is and what you can support. That will drive the profile of the person that you are able to hire. And also, your budget's going to drive it too, right? Like if you can't afford people's experience, that's a problem. But if you're a startup, I still wouldn't go with college hires for that job.
It's hard. Yeah. A lot of people are doing that, unfortunately, for everybody, because can you imagine just, okay, here's all these tools. Start calling. It is a lot. Yeah. Have you found any particular characteristic or major in college or lifestyle thing that works really well for the SDR role?
Well, number one, grit. Number one skill characteristic is grit. And, clearly people who've done competitive things in their careers and in their life, play sports, is a good thing, or they're still doing something competitive. I think people who are competitive are well suited for that role typically. I guess if you want to just keep it like a short list, it's grit and somebody who's done something competitive. I don't think there's a specific major that people have to be an SDR, as long as they show they have, those other two skills. I mean, clearly you want them to have the capability to learn your products. They have to be a quick learner, and they have to be articulate and have good communication skills. But I think grit and being competitive are really important.
How about as far as a degree, actually finishing the degree? Is that critical?
Well, I guess I would say we prefer people with degrees, because it definitely shows you had, like you said, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to finish. It shows you can finish. Is it possible that with somebody without a degree to be successful? I do think it's possible. And I've seen very successful salespeople who don't have a degree, but we typically do hire people with degrees. But I wouldn't want to say that you can't be successful without one.
Excellent. Hey, I really enjoyed this conversation. Where do people go to follow you, connect with you, and learn more about your work?
Well, they can find me both on LinkedIn and on Twitter. So it's Lori Harmon on both. I'm at Lori Harmon, LoriHarmon on Twitter, and Lori Harmon also on LinkedIn, or Lori L. Harmon on LinkedIn.
Hey, Lori really knows her stuff. I mean, scaling an inside team is hard. It's hard to find the right people. It's hard to train them, hard to determine if they're going to make the right steps and the right match. But if you have a system, a process of how to connect with people, how to find the right people, how to be human and understand what they care about, how to engage them in a conversation about their role in life and how they fit into the company. That's really what distinguishes you. And being able to train and coach people through that process is really critical. And there's very few great leaders in that space. So I think Lori's one of them. I really appreciate her coming on the show. If you'd like to get a free copy of my book, The Maverick Selling Method, it's really how the complex sale works and how to control it, direct it, and manage it. So it's really like selling to enterprises, doing large deals. All you have to do is take a screenshot of you listening to the podcast, meaning the podcast artwork on your phone. Just screenshot it. It'll go to your camera roll. Go into LinkedIn, add an update, and just add that image. Tag one other person or two other people, hopefully salespeople or sales leaders, and me, Brian Burns. And if to tag people, all you have to do is use the @ sign and then start typing their first name right next to it, just like Twitter, like the @ sign being their label or tag, and post that on LinkedIn. I'll see it, and make sure we're a level 1 connection, and I'll email you the copy of my book, The Maverick Selling Method. Also, make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. There's a free ebook there on how companies make product selections. Now, very few people in marketing understand this, and very few people in sales actually understand it. They all think that if somebody's excited, they're just going to run down to procurement and issue a PO. That's not how it works. and people call it no decision. It's called no. It's called deal lost. It's called lost momentum. It's called not understanding how companies buy. And it's not your fault. Very few people know it. And the people who do know it have very little incentive to actually promote it or share it with other people. And that's really what I want to do, is help you understand the game you're playing. It's not a one function, one skill game. Much like every other game, there's a set of skills, a strategy, and a sequence of things that you have to go through. And if you don't know what those are, how can you play the game? So a lot of us are in the blind leading the blind here. We think we understand what works, but we understand really what one element of what works. So check out that book. All you have to do is put in your email. I will send you a link to the book. And then you just click on the link. It's in box, and you'll download the PDF version of it. Thanks for listening, and please tell somebody about the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast.